Michael Chen stood in his kitchen, coffee mug halfway to his lips, when he heard it. A soft thud from somewhere above his head. He froze, listening. The old Victorian house he'd bought 3 months ago had plenty of quirks, creaking floorboards, rattling pipes, windows that whistled in the wind, but this was different. This was deliberate. This was the sound of something moving with weight and purpose. He set down his mug carefully, his heart beginning to pick up speed. The house was supposed to be empty. He lived alone, had changed all the locks the day he moved in, and the real estate agent had assured him no one else had keys. Yet there it was again. A scraping sound, like something being dragged across wooden boards. It came from directly above the kitchen, which meant it was coming from the loft. Michael hadn't been up to the loft yet. The narrow pull-down stairs seemed rickety, and he told himself he'd explore it once he'd settled in properly. Now he wished he'd been more curious. He grabbed his phone from the counter, his thumb hovering over the emergency call button, then hesitated. What would he tell them? That his house was making noises? They'd think he was paranoid. The scraping stopped. Silence settled over the house like a held breath. Michael counted to 30, then 60, straining to hear anything else. Nothing. Maybe it had been his imagination, or maybe something had fallen over up there. Old houses collected junk in their attics. The previous owner had died, and her family had cleared out quickly, carelessly. They could have left anything up there. He moved toward the hallway where the loft access was located, his footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. The rope dangled from the ceiling hatch, taunting him. He reached up and pulled. The ladder unfolded with a metallic groan that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet house. Dust rained down, making him cough and wave his hand in front of his face. The opening above was dark, a square of blackness that his eyes couldn't penetrate. Michael turned on his phone's flashlight and pointed it upward. The beam caught cobwebs and the edge of a cardboard box, but nothing else. He took a breath, testing his courage, and placed his foot on the first rung. The ladder held. He climbed slowly, counting each step to keep his mind focused. His head emerged into the loft, and he swept the flashlight around. The space was larger than he'd expected, running the length of the house with a peaked roof that created shadows in every corner. Boxes were stacked against one wall, some labeled in faded marker, others torn and spilling yellowed papers. An old dress form stood in the corner like a headless ghost. A broken chair lay on its side near a small, round window that let in a weak shaft of afternoon light. Michael pulled himself up the last few rungs and stood, hunched under the low ceiling. The air was thick and stale, tasting of dust and time. He moved the flashlight beam systematically across the space, searching for whatever had made the noise. A fallen box, maybe, or a raccoon that had found its way inside. His light passed over an old trunk, a stack of picture frames, a rolled carpet, and then he stopped breathing. There, in the far corner behind a pile of boxes, 2 eyes reflected his light like a cat's. But these weren't animal eyes. They were human, wide and terrified, staring directly at him. Michael stumbled backward, nearly falling through the open hatch. His phone slipped from his fingers and clattered on the wooden floor, the light spinning wildly before settling at an angle that illuminated the corner. A woman crouched there, pressed against the wall as if trying to merge with it. She was thin, pale, with dark hair hanging in tangles around her face. Her clothes were dirty and wrinkled, and her hands were raised in front of her, not in defense but in a gesture of pleading. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then, barely above a whisper, she spoke. "Please don't hurt me." Michael's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to get out of the loft and call the police immediately. But something in her voice, something in the way she trembled, kept him frozen in place. She wasn't threatening. She was terrified. Her eyes glistened with tears she was clearly fighting to hold back, and he could see her chest rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, his voice rough. "What are you doing in my house?" She flinched at his words as if they were physical blows. A tear escaped down her cheek, leaving a clean track through the dust on her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know where else to go." Michael's hands shook as he retrieved his phone from the floor, keeping the light and his eyes fixed on the woman. She hadn't moved from her corner, still pressed against the wall like a cornered animal. Up close, he could see more details that troubled him. Her clothes weren't just dirty, they were torn at the sleeve, and there was a dark stain on her collar that might have been blood. Her bare feet were filthy, cut and bruised. She looked like she'd been through hell. "I'm calling the police," he said, trying to sound firm despite the tremor in his voice. "No. The word burst from her with such desperation that Michael actually lowered his phone. She lurched forward slightly, then stopped herself, seeming to remember her vulnerability. Please, please don't call them. Not yet. Just let me explain. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. If you still want to call after that, I won't stop you. I promise. Michael's mind screamed that this was a terrible idea. Every true crime podcast he'd ever listened to, every news story about home invasions, told him to get out and call for help. But something about her stopped him. Maybe it was the genuine terror in her eyes, or the way she held herself, not like a threat, but like someone who'd been running for so long she'd forgotten how to stop. 5 minutes, he said finally, moving to sit on an old trunk that put some distance between them. Start talking. She closed her eyes briefly, relief washing over her features. My name is Sarah Winters. I've been hiding in this loft for 6 days. The words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them in for so long they'd built up pressure. I know how insane that sounds. I know you must think I'm crazy or dangerous or both, but I'm not. I'm just trying to stay alive. Alive? Michael repeated. From what? From who? Sarah pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. The position made her look smaller, younger than he'd first thought. She might have been 30 or 40, it was hard to tell under the grime and exhaustion. My husband, she said quietly. David Winters. He's going to kill me if he finds me. He's tried before. The words hung in the dusty air between them. Michael wanted to disbelieve her, to find the flaw in her story that would make this situation simpler, clearer. But he'd seen the news reports, read the statistics. Domestic violence was real, and women died from it every day. Still, that didn't explain why she was in his attic. Why here? He asked. Why my house? Sarah wiped at her face with the back of her hand, smearing the dirt. The woman who lived here before you, Mrs. Patterson, she was my grandmother. I used to visit her when I was a kid, before David, before everything. When I finally got away from him 6 days ago, I didn't have anywhere else to go. The shelters were full, and my friends, he knows all my friends. He'd looked there first. But I remembered this house, remembered that my grandmother had died and it was being sold. I thought maybe it would be empty long enough for me to figure out what to do next. So you broke in? The window. She gestured weakly toward the small round window behind her. It's always been broken. The latch never worked properly. I climbed the tree outside and got in. I thought the house was still empty. I didn't know you'd moved in until I heard you downstairs that first night. By then, I was too scared to leave. David has people looking for me. He has connections with the police force. If I show up anywhere official, he'll know within hours. Michael processed this information, trying to sort truth from possible manipulation. If your husband is so dangerous, why didn't you leave before? Why wait until it got this bad? Something dark flashed across Sarah's face, a mixture of anger and shame. You think I didn't try? I left him 4 times. 4 times, I got away, stayed with different people, tried to start over. Each time, he found me. The last time, he broke my wrist and 3 ribs. He told me the next time I tried to leave, he'd make sure no one would ever find my body. She held up her left wrist, and Michael could see it was slightly crooked, healed wrong. That was 8 months ago. It took me this long to plan, to wait for the right moment. He went on a business trip to Chicago. I took my chance. But he's back now? He came back early. 3 days ago. I saw his car driving through the neighborhood. He's looking for me, Michael. I know he is. She paused, seeming to realize she'd used his name. I'm sorry, I heard you on the phone. I didn't mean to listen, but sound carries up here. I've heard everything. Your calls, your music, your life. I feel terrible about it. Michael stood up, needing to move, to think. This was beyond anything he'd ever dealt with. If she was telling the truth, she needed help, real help, not just a hiding place in his attic. But if she was lying, if this was some elaborate setup, he was putting himself in danger by not calling the police immediately. I've been living on crackers and water, Sarah continued, her voice small. I found some old cans of food up here, things my grandmother must have stored years ago. I only move around when you're out of the house or asleep. I tried so hard to be quiet, but I got dizzy today, knocked over a box. I'm sorry I scared you. Michael turned back to her, studying her face in the dim light. She met his gaze steadily, and he saw something there that decided it for him, not innocence exactly, but honesty. Raw, desperate honesty. Okay, he said slowly. Let's say I believe you. What exactly do you expect me to do? Sarah's expression shifted from fear to something Michael couldn't quite read, hope mixed with disbelief, as if she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone consider helping her. She unfolded slightly from her defensive position, though her body remained tense, ready to retreat at any sign of threat. I don't expect anything, she said carefully. I know I violated your space, your home. I know you'd be completely justified in calling the police right now. But if you could just give me a few more days, just until I can contact someone who can help me disappear properly. There are organizations, underground networks for women like me. I've been trying to reach one, but the phone I stole from a coffee shop ran out of battery 2 days ago. Michael ran his hand through his hair, pacing in the confined space of the loft. His rational mind told him this was insane. He didn't know this woman. Her story, however compelling, could be entirely fabricated. She could be dangerous, mentally unstable, or running from the law rather than an abusive husband. Yet something in his gut, the same instinct that had led him to buy this house despite its problems, told him she was telling the truth. Show me your arms, he said abruptly. Sarah looked confused but slowly extended her arms. Even in the poor light, Michael could see them. Bruises in various stages of healing, yellowing and green and purple. Circular marks around her wrists that looked like fingerprints. A long, thin scar running from her elbow to her wrist that was whiter than the rest of her skin, clearly old. Cigarette burns, she said flatly, pointing to 3 small, round scars on her forearm. From 2 years ago. He was angry because I'd signed up for a pottery class without asking his permission. The wrist scar is from when I went through a glass door trying to get away from him during an argument. He told the hospital I was clumsy, that I'd tripped. I was too scared to say otherwise. Michael felt sick. He'd lived a relatively sheltered life, had never witnessed violence like this up close. The evidence written on her skin was damning, undeniable. How long were you married to him? 7 years. We dated for 1 year before that. He didn't show this side of himself until after the wedding. It started small, criticism about my clothes, my friends, how I spent money. Then it was isolation. He convinced me to quit my job, to cut off contact with my family because they didn't understand our love. By the time the physical abuse started, I was so deep in his control I didn't know how to get out. I didn't even know who I was anymore without him telling me. Michael sat back down on the trunk, his legs suddenly weak. What did you do before? For work, I mean. A ghost of a smile crossed Sarah's face, the first hint of the person she might have been before David Winters. I was a graphic designer. Freelance, mostly book covers and small business logos. I loved it. I was actually pretty good at it too. David hated that. Hated that I had something that was mine, something he couldn't control. That's why he made me stop. And your family? You said he made you cut contact. Where are they now? The smile disappeared. My parents died in a car accident 5 years ago. My grandmother, Mrs. Patterson, was all I had left, and David made sure I barely saw her. Told her lies about me, made her think I was the problem. By the time she died last year, we hadn't spoken in months. I never got to tell her I was sorry, or that I loved her, or that she was right about David all along. Her voice cracked on the last words, and she pressed her palms against her eyes. Michael gave her a moment, watching as she fought for composure. When she lowered her hands, her eyes were red but dry. I can't let you stay here without doing something, he said finally. If your husband is really as dangerous as you say, and if he has police connections, we need to be smart about this. But I can help you. I think I can help you. Sarah's head snapped up. You believe me? I don't know what I believe entirely, but I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. However, we do this my way. You can stay in the loft for now, but we need to set some rules. And we need to get you proper help, not just hide you away like some kind of fugitive. What kind of rules? Michael thought quickly, trying to balance compassion with caution. First, you tell me everything about your husband, what he looks like, what kind of car he drives, where he works, everything. If he's really looking for you in this neighborhood, I need to know who to watch for. Second, you only move around up here when I tell you it's safe. No more accidents, no more noises. If someone comes to the house, you're absolutely silent. Third, you let me help you contact one of those organizations you mentioned. I'll get you a phone, a charger, whatever you need. But we do this right. Why are you helping me? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't know me. For all you know, I could be lying about everything. Michael met her gaze. My mother, he said quietly. When I was 8 years old, she left my father. He was like your husband, I think. Maybe not as bad, or maybe just better at hiding it. I didn't understand it then, thought it was my fault somehow. She took me and my sister and we disappeared in the middle of the night. Stayed with strangers, people from a church network who helped women escape. I remember this one woman who let us sleep in her basement for a week, gave us food, never asked for anything in return. She saved our lives, probably literally. My father was furious when he couldn't find us. Made threats, tried to use his business connections to track us down. If it hadn't been for people willing to help, I don't know what would have happened. Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes. Where is he now? Your father? Dead. Heart attack, 10 years ago. My mother finally felt safe enough to stop running. She lives in Oregon now, remarried to a kind man who treats her like she's precious. I visit her every Christmas. Michael stood up, his decision made. So yes, I'm going to help you. Because someone helped my mother when she needed it most, and because I can't live in this house knowing you're up here suffering and do nothing about it. Sarah's face crumpled, and this time she couldn't hold back the tears. They came in silent, shaking sobs that made her whole body tremble. Michael awkwardly found a relatively clean blanket in one of the boxes and handed it to her. She clutched it like a lifeline, pressing it against her face to muffle her crying. Thank you, she managed between sobs. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Michael said, though his voice was gentle. We've got a lot of work to do, and this could get dangerous for both of us. But first, you need food, water, and a chance to clean up. When was the last time you ate a real meal? Sarah lowered the blanket, wiping at her eyes. Sunday, I think? I found a half-eaten sandwich in a trash can near the park. Before that, it was the crackers up here. Today was Friday. Michael's jaw tightened. Okay, new rule number 4, no more starving in my attic. I'm going to bring you food and water, and we're going to figure this out together. Over the next 2 days, Michael and Sarah fell into a careful rhythm. He would bring food up to the loft 3 times a day, simple things at first, sandwiches and soup, worried that her stomach might reject anything too heavy after days of near starvation. He brought bottles of water, wet wipes for her to clean herself with, and a change of clothes that had belonged to his sister from her last visit. Sarah accepted everything with a gratitude that made Michael uncomfortable, as if kindness was something foreign and shocking to her. During these visits, Sarah told him everything about David Winters. He was 42, a corporate lawyer at one of the city's most prestigious firms. Tall, handsome in a sharp-featured way, with prematurely silver hair that he kept perfectly styled. He drove a black Mercedes sedan and had a circle of influential friends that included judges, police captains, and city council members. He was charming in public, the kind of man who donated to charity and volunteered at youth sports leagues. No one who knew him socially would ever suspect what he was capable of behind closed doors. He's meticulous, Sarah explained during one of their conversations. She sat wrapped in the blanket Michael had given her, looking slightly more human now that she'd eaten and cleaned up. Everything he does is calculated. When he hurts me, it's always where clothes will cover it. When he threatens me, it's always in private, with no witnesses. He's documented everything I've supposedly done wrong, kept journals of my erratic behavior, recorded arguments out of context to make me sound unstable. If I ever went to the police, he'd have a mountain of evidence to paint me as the crazy one. Michael had spent his evenings researching domestic violence escape networks online, being careful to clear his browser history and use private browsing modes. He'd found several organizations, but the process was complicated. Sarah would need documentation, safe transport, and a place in their system. It could take weeks to arrange, and they didn't have weeks if David was actively searching the neighborhood. On the 3rd day, Michael came home from work to find a black Mercedes parked across the street from his house. His blood turned to ice. He drove past slowly, trying not to stare, and caught a glimpse of the man inside. Silver hair, sharp features, expensive suit. David Winters sat in his car like a predator watching for prey, his eyes scanning the street with methodical precision. Michael parked in his driveway with hands that had gone numb. He forced himself to walk normally to his front door, to not look back at the Mercedes, to not give any sign that he knew who was watching. Once inside, he locked the door and stood with his back against it, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. He couldn't go up to the loft. Not now, not with David right outside. Any change in his routine might draw attention. Instead, he moved through his house as he normally would, turning on lights, checking his mail, starting dinner. All the while, his mind raced with possibilities and fears. What if David somehow knew Sarah was here? What if someone had seen her climbing through the window? What if this was the moment everything fell apart? An hour passed. Then 2. Michael stood at his living room window, partially hidden by the curtain, and watched the Mercedes. David never got out. He just sat there, waiting, watching. It was an intimidation tactic, Michael realized. David was checking the houses of anyone connected to Sarah's past, making his presence known, creating fear. Finally, as darkness fell, the Mercedes pulled away. Michael watched until its taillights disappeared around the corner, then he waited another 30 minutes before he dared to pull down the loft ladder. Sarah must have heard him coming because she was already sitting up, her face pale and drawn in the light from his phone. "He's here, isn't he?" she whispered. "I felt it. I don't know how, but I felt him nearby." "He was parked outside for almost 3 hours," Michael confirmed, climbing fully into the loft and sitting down across from her. "He didn't get out, didn't approach the house. Just watched." "That's what he does," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "He watched my friend Jessica's apartment for a week straight after I left him the 3rd time. She finally had to move because she was so terrified. He never threatened her, never did anything illegal, but the watching was enough. He wanted her to know he could get to her whenever he wanted." Michael pulled out his phone. "I think it's time to contact those organizations now. This is escalating too quickly." "He'll check them," Sarah said with absolute certainty. "He'll have people monitoring the shelters, the safe houses, the support groups. He knows how these things work. He's studied them the same way a hunter studies animal behavior. He'll be waiting." "Then what do you suggest?" "Because hiding in my attic forever isn't a solution, Sarah. Sooner or later, he's going to figure out you're here, or you're going to make a noise at the wrong time, or I'm going to slip up somehow. We need a real plan." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, harder, more determined. "I need to disappear completely. Not just hide, but cease to exist as Sarah Winters. New name, new identity, new life. There are people who can do that, but it costs money. A lot of money." "How much?" 20,000, maybe more. I'd need documents, driver's license, social security card, birth certificate, all under a new name. I'd need to get far away, somewhere he'd never think to look. Start completely over." She laughed bitterly. "I have $300 in cash that I stole from his wallet the night I left. That's it. Everything else is in accounts he controls." Michael did the math in his head. He had savings, enough to cover it if he was careful. His parents had left him some money when they passed, and he'd been living frugally, building up his accounts. But giving that much cash to someone he'd known for less than a week? That was insane. That was beyond risky. That was. "I'll do it," he heard himself say. Sarah's head snapped up. "What?" "I'll give you the money. We'll find someone who can create the documents, and we'll get you out of here before David figures out where you are." The words came out with more confidence than he felt, but once he'd said them, he knew he meant it. "Michael, no. I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask. I'm offering. My mother once told me that the people who helped her weren't rich, weren't powerful. They were just ordinary people who saw someone in trouble and decided to do something about it. One woman gave her $2,000 she'd been saving for a vacation. Another gave her a car, just handed over the keys and the title. They never expected to be paid back. They did it because it was the right thing to do." Tears streamed down Sarah's face again, but she was smiling through them. "I will pay you back. Someday, somehow, I will pay you back every penny. Just promise me you'll live," Michael said. "That you'll get away from him and build a life where you're safe and free. That's all the payment I need." They spent the next hour making plans. Michael would reach out to his most tech-savvy friend, someone who'd mentioned knowing people in less than legal circles. They would need to move quickly now that David was actively searching the neighborhood. Sarah would need to stay absolutely silent and still for the next few days, no matter what happened downstairs. As Michael prepared to climb back down the ladder, Sarah called out to him softly. "Michael? Why does this house mean so much to you? I've heard you on the phone talking about it, about how you saved up for years to buy it. But it needs so much work, and it's not exactly in the best neighborhood. Why here?" Michael paused on the ladder, considering his answer. "My mother grew up 3 blocks from here," he said finally. "Before she met my father, before everything went wrong. She used to tell me stories about this neighborhood, about how safe and happy she felt here. When this house came on the market, it felt like a sign. Like maybe I could honor her somehow by making a good life in the place where she'd once been happy. Does that sound stupid? No, Sarah said softly. It sounds like something a good person would do. Your mother raised you right. Michael smiled in the darkness. Yeah, she did. The package arrived on the 5th day, delivered by a nervous kid on a motorcycle who handed it to Michael and sped away without waiting for a signature. Inside was everything Sarah would need to become someone else: a driver's license with her photo but a different name, Emma Richardson, a social security card, a birth certificate from a small town in Montana, and even a passport. Michael's friend had come through, though it had cost nearly $30,000 instead of $20,000. Michael had emptied his savings account without hesitation. He brought the package up to the loft that evening, climbing the ladder with the familiar mixture of caution and urgency that had become routine. Sarah waited for him in her corner, looking stronger than she had when he'd first found her. Regular meals and rest had brought color back to her face, though her eyes still carried the haunted look of someone who'd lived too long in fear. Is that it? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Michael nodded, handing her the envelope. She opened it with shaking hands, studying each document with an intensity that made his chest tight. Emma Richardson. A whole new person, a whole new life, contained in a few pieces of paper. There's a bus ticket too, Michael said, pulling it from his pocket. Leaves tomorrow night at 11. Goes to Seattle. From there, you can go anywhere: Canada, Alaska, down the coast to California. Wherever you think he won't look. Sarah looked up from the documents, her eyes glistening. Tomorrow night? That's so soon. It has to be. David came back yesterday. Parked in the same spot, watched for 2 hours. He's getting more persistent, more focused. I think he suspects something about this house, maybe because it belonged to your grandmother. We can't risk waiting any longer. She nodded slowly, understanding the logic even as something in her expression suggested she wasn't ready to leave. I've been practicing my new signature, she said, holding up the Emma Richardson driver's license. It looks real. How did your friend? Don't ask, Michael interrupted gently. The less we both know about that, the better. What matters is that it'll pass inspection unless someone looks really, really closely. As long as you're careful, stay under the radar, you should be fine. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of tomorrow's departure settling over them. Over the past days, they developed a strange friendship born of crisis and necessity. Michael had learned about Sarah's love of old movies, her talent for drawing. She'd sketched his portrait on the back of a cardboard box with just a pencil stub she'd found, and her dream of opening a small art gallery someday. Sarah had learned about his job as an architect, his failed engagement 2 years ago, and his habit of talking to his plants because he read somewhere it helped them grow. I'm going to miss this, Sarah said suddenly. Is that crazy? I've been hiding in an attic, scared for my life, but I'm going to miss our conversations. You're the first person in years who's treated me like I'm a real person, not just David's wife or David's property. You are a real person, Michael said firmly. You're Sarah Winters who survived something terrible, and you're going to be Emma Richardson who builds something beautiful. Don't ever forget that. A sound from downstairs made them both freeze. A knock at the front door, firm and authoritative. Michael's blood ran cold. He put a finger to his lips, signaling Sarah to stay absolutely silent, and crept to the edge of the loft opening. From there, he could hear voices. Michael Chen? This is Officer Rodriguez. We need to ask you a few questions. Police. David had sent the police. Michael's mind raced through possibilities. He could pretend not to be home, but his car was in the driveway. He could refuse to let them in, but that would look suspicious. He had to go down there, had to act completely normal, even with Sarah hiding just feet above his head. Coming, he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. He looked back at Sarah one last time. She had pressed herself into the corner, making herself as small as possible, her hand clamped over her mouth. He climbed down the ladder and pushed it back up quietly, then walked to the front door on legs that felt like water. 2 officers stood on his porch. Rodriguez was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, and her partner was a younger man whose name tag read Martinez. Behind them, Michael could see the black Mercedes parked across the street. David sat inside, watching. Mr. Chen, Rodriguez said with a professional smile. Sorry to bother you this evening. We're investigating a missing person case, and we're checking with residents in this neighborhood. May we come in? Every instinct screamed at Michael to refuse, but he knew that would only make things worse. Of course, he said, stepping aside to let them enter. Though I'm not sure how I can help. I only moved in a few months ago. We understand, Martinez said, his eyes scanning the living room. We're looking for Sarah Winters. She's been missing for a week, and her husband is very concerned. He pulled out a photo, Sarah smiling in better times, her arm around David who stood beside her like the perfect husband. Michael forced himself to look at the photo with casual interest, not recognition. I'm sorry, I don't know her. Should I have seen her around the neighborhood? Rodriguez watched him carefully. Her grandmother used to own this house. Mrs. Patterson. We're wondering if Ms. Winters might have had some connection to the property, if she might have tried to access it in some way. The real estate agent never mentioned anything like that, Michael said, which was technically true. And I've been here alone since I moved in. I would have noticed if someone was trying to get in. Have you noticed anything unusual? Martinez asked. Strange noises, signs of a break-in, anything like that. Michael thought about the sound that had first led him to Sarah, about the scraped floor and the knocked-over box. He thought about the 6 days she'd spent hiding in his loft, just feet above where they were standing. No, he said, meeting Martinez's eyes directly. Nothing unusual. Old houses make noise sometimes, but nothing that would suggest someone was here. Rodriguez pulled out a business card. Well, if you do notice anything, please call us immediately. Mr. Winters is extremely worried about his wife. She has some mental health issues, and she's not taking her medication. We're concerned for her safety. Mental health issues. Not taking her medication. Michael felt a flash of anger at the manipulation, the way David had planted the narrative that Sarah was the unstable one. I'll definitely call if I see anything, he said, taking the card. The officers thanked him and left. Through the window, Michael watched them walk to the Mercedes and speak with David. The conversation lasted several minutes, with David gesturing emphatically and the officers nodding sympathetically. Finally, the police car pulled away, and David sat alone in his Mercedes, staring at Michael's house. Michael didn't move for a full 10 minutes. He stood at the window, staring back at David, refusing to show fear or guilt. Eventually, David started his engine and drove away, but Michael knew he'd be back. The net was tightening. He climbed back up to the loft to find Sarah curled in a tight ball, shaking uncontrollably. He's making me sound crazy, she whispered. Mental health issues. Not taking medication. That's what he'll tell everyone. That's how he'll explain it if I turn up dead. You're not going to turn up dead, Michael said fiercely. You're getting on that bus tomorrow night, and you're going to disappear. Emma Richardson doesn't have mental health issues. Emma Richardson doesn't have a husband who wants to kill her. Emma Richardson is free.